What's up guys, Dr. Joey here. If you want to build muscle and improve your body composition, it's important to eat sufficient protein to support muscle growth. In this video, I'm going to be answering important questions about protein, like how much protein should you eat, how to space out your protein throughout the day, as well as what kinds of proteins you need to be eating so that you can be well on your way to building some muscle. First, let's discuss what is protein and why is it important. Proteins are made out of individual amino acids. There are 20 amino acids that make up thousands of different proteins. Think of amino acids as individual pieces of Legos that can be used to form complex structures. Individual amino acids come together to form chains of amino acids called peptides. Long peptide chains then fold and form complex structures that we call proteins. The reason we need protein to build muscle is that muscle is mainly made out of protein, about 80% of dry weight to be exact. Therefore, if you want to build muscle, you need protein, aka the building blocks, in order to build new muscle tissue. The next question we're going to answer is, what kinds of proteins do you need to eat? Before we get to that question, really quick guys, if you're enjoying this video so far, I would really appreciate if you hit the like button. It takes a second and it really makes a difference for me, and it helps me reach more people with my content. Thank you. Okay, back to what we were talking about. All protein sources are not equal. 9 of the 20 amino acids found in proteins are considered essential amino acids because our bodies cannot synthesize them, so you have to get them from your diet. The other 11 are considered non-essential, meaning that our bodies can produce them from other nutrients. Essential amino acids are essential for muscle growth. Therefore, if you want to build muscle, you should make sure you consume an adequate amount of them from your diet. Proteins that contain all 9 essential amino acids in appropriate amounts are called complete proteins. Most animal-based protein sources are high-quality complete proteins. In other words, they contain all 9 essential amino acids. These include things like chicken, steak, yogurt, cheese, and all sorts of dairy. On the other hand, plant-based protein sources are typically not complete proteins because they do not contain all 9 essential amino acids in appropriate quantities. That doesn't mean that plant proteins are useless and not effective for building muscle. You can mix and match plant proteins so that they contain all 9 essential amino acids, which is what we call complementary proteins. For example, combining rice and lentils is a perfect example of complementary proteins, since rice is high in methionine, an essential amino acid that is naturally low in lentils, while lentils are high in lysine, an essential amino acid that rice lacks. If you eat proteins from a wide variety of different plant-based sources, you can still make sure to get adequate amounts of essential amino acids in your diet. Overall, you don't really need to be very tedious about where your protein comes from though. If you eat a well-balanced diet and consume sufficient total protein, you should be getting sufficient amounts of all essential amino acids to stimulate muscle growth. Okay, up to this point in the video, you should have a general understanding of what proteins are, why are they important for building muscle, and what kinds of protein sources you should be consuming. The next logical question to answer is, well, how much total protein do you need in order to build muscle mass? Based on the dietary recommended intakes published by the Institute of Medicine, the daily recommended allowance for protein is 0.8 grams per kilogram of body weight. That means that if you weigh 160 pounds, you should consume roughly 60 grams of protein based on the RDA. However, the RDAs are set to prevent nutrient deficiencies and not for optimizing muscle growth. If you want to maximize muscle growth, you should be consuming significantly more protein than the RDA. Bodybuilders often recommend consuming 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight. Based on this recommendation, you should consume 160 grams of protein if you weigh 160 pounds. Although this recommendation is perfectly fine, it's pretty basic and lacks nuance. Instead of taking recommendations from gym bros, we should look at what the actual research literature suggests in terms of optimal protein intake for muscle growth. The International Society for Sports Nutrition, the ISSN, published a position stand on protein intake for athletes in 2017, which was published by leading experts in the field of protein and body composition research. Based on the available research, they found that a daily protein intake of 1.4 to 2 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight is sufficient and optimal to support muscle growth. Again, if you weigh 160 pounds, that means that you should consume anywhere between 100 and 145 grams of protein to maximize muscle growth. Nonetheless, this range is still pretty wide. The reason why the range is so large is that there are other variables besides your body weight that can influence how much protein you should be consuming, such as your age, energy status, and body fat percentage. For example, as we age, a phenomenon known as anabolic resistance occurs, which simply means that older adults are not as sensitive to protein as younger adults. In other words, 30 grams of protein for an older adult will not stimulate the same amount of muscle growth as it would for a younger adult. For this reason, older adults who are 60 and above may benefit benefit from a higher protein intake compared to younger adults in their 20s or 30s. Energy status is another important consideration. If an individual is in a calorie surplus, they likely do not need as much protein compared to somebody who's in a calorie deficit, since more of the protein will be spared from being used as energy due to the excess calories and instead can be used for building muscle. Lastly, you also need to consider your body fat percentage. The recommendations of 1.4 grams to 2 grams per kilogram are based on total body weight. However, protein recommendations are truly determined by how much muscle mass someone has and not how much they weigh. If two individuals have the same body weight, but one is significantly leaner than the other, the individual who's leaner would have a higher protein requirement. If you're someone who's significantly overweight or obese, you can set your protein targets using your predicted healthy target weight rather than your current body weight. For example, a 280-pound adult whose target goal is 220 pounds can set their protein recommendations based on that target weight of 220 pounds. Based on this criteria, you can understand why the range for optimal protein intake can vary so widely. A very lean older individual undergoing weight loss will require significantly more protein than the less lean younger adult who's gaining weight even if their body weight is the same. However, I will say this, it doesn't make sense for anyone to purposely follow the lower end of the recommendation unless they simply do not enjoy eating a high protein diet. This is because a high protein diet may be beneficial for muscle growth and doesn't have any negative side effects. For those of you that don't enjoy consuming a high protein diet, don't worry. It probably doesn't make a huge difference in how much muscle mass you can gain consuming 1.4 grams per kilo compared to eating 2.0 grams per kilo of body weight. Now that we have discussed how much protein you need, the last question we need to answer is, how should your protein intake be spaced out throughout the day? Should you eat all of your protein in one sitting? Should you have small amounts of protein 6 to 8 times throughout the day? Or does it really even matter at all? To be completely clear, your total daily protein intake is by far the most important variable to consider. Timing is not nearly as important, but for those of you who want to optimize your diet as much as possible to get absolutely jacked, timing can be an important consideration. Anytime you eat protein, you stimulate what we call muscle protein synthesis, which is simply the mechanism by which our body grows new muscle. After consuming protein, muscle protein synthesis is typically elevated between 3 to 5 hours. Variables like the size of your meal and the type of protein consumed will dictate whether it's closer to 3 hours or 5 hours, but that's the general range. Therefore, if you want to maximize muscle growth, in theory, you should consume protein every 3 to 5 hours to maximize the amount of time spent growing muscle, aka stimulating MPS. This would result in 3 to 5 protein feedings per day. I do want to let you know that there isn't super strong scientific evidence to support that doing this is going to result in way better gains than having your protein in 2 meals, for example. However, theoretically it does make sense and it's worth doing if your lifestyle allows for it. What I do personally is I take my total protein intake and divide it by 4 and have that at each meal. I try to eat about 200 grams of protein per day, so I have about 50 grams at breakfast around 8 a.m., 50 grams at noon with lunch, another 50 grams around 4 or 5, and then usually have my last 50 grams as a shake before bed. Alrighty guys, that pretty much covers everything you need to know about protein for muscle growth. To quickly summarize, the reason protein is important is because muscle is made of protein and you need to eat protein in order to synthesize new muscle tissue. All proteins are not created equal. You need to make sure you consume sufficient essential amino acids. The combination of animal and plant-based proteins should do the trick. If you want to maximize muscle growth, you should consume anywhere between 1.4 to 2.0 grams of protein per kilo of body weight. Most people would benefit from being on the upper end of this range. Lastly, if you want to optimize your nutrition, make sure you spread your protein intake as evenly as possible in 4 to 5 feedings throughout the day. Guys, if you haven't already, make sure to check out my free ebook on nutrition for fat loss, covering many of these basic nutritional concepts. The link is in my bio, and I'll catch you guys next week. See ya.